Hello, good morning, Sitaram, and welcome again to this another segment in the series Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Ramnaresh Dwarika. I want to welcome all our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago, worldwide, all of those people who are listening on social media, Facebook and YouTube. And just to remind you, this program will also be rebroadcast at 10 p.m. tonight on Radio and TV Jagriti. And it will be posted on YouTube soon after and Facebook soon after its completion so that you may be able to access it at your own time and convenience. And you may also be able to refer it to someone, send a link if you think they may benefit from the discussion we're having here this morning. So again, this morning I would like to speak to about triggers. People who are in recovery, most will be aware of what I'm talking about, but sometimes they are unaware of what their triggers were. You just stop drinking, you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, or you went for treatment at Cora Hospital or New Life Ministries, and you would have been taught, when you go to these in-house treatment facilities, you get a little reprieve. You are taken out of your environment where the drug is available. If you went to Cora for 6 weeks, or you went to New Life Ministries for 3 months, or Rebirth House, in those settings, those are what you call sanctuaries, where you are protected. You're not exposed to alcohol and drugs. And as a result, you have a chance to be detoxed from the effect of it and to learn that you can live and function without the use of drugs. However, sometimes a lot of people are unaware of what triggered them in the first place. And if you are unaware of your triggers, when you come out of these settings, these safe houses, and you get back into your community, a lot of people relapse. In fact, I was part of a survey that was done by Dr. Igwe and Mr. Ujir, myself, and we followed up on a cohort of patients who were discharged from Cora Hospital. And those who went to AA meetings, almost 80% of them were able to remain abstinent and sober. Those who went home and tried to do it on their own, they did not last very long. Most of them relapsed. So generally, it is critical. Stopping is hard, but staying stopped is what is the challenge. And to be able to stay stopped, one has to become aware of the triggers that cause them to use drugs in the first place. And for some people, they are what you call emotional triggers. That is, over time, because alcohol and drugs alter our moods, from being depressed or upset or disappointed, or emotionally in a bind. Some of us would have started taking a drink or smoke, recreationally. But we quickly learned that when we took that drink, it changed our mood. This is why sometimes alcohol and marijuana and so on are called mood altering substances, because they are able to change your mood. So that we realize, okay, so now that I'm facing a real life situation that is causing me to be emotionally upset, I remember that when I took a drink or I took a smoke of marijuana, I felt different. So there's where we start becoming dependent on the drug now to help us to cope with emotional trauma. When we feel overwhelmed by a situation, we are quickly it comes to mind that we can go and take a drink or take a smoke. And especially if we started doing that early in life, before we learned mature ways of coping with disappointment and grief and rejection and all of that, this is a prescription for making us dependent. Eventually we become dependent. We don't know how to cope. We have not learned the proper coping skills to help us. And we also know that whatever goes up must come down. So that, okay, so we were depressed, we were anxious, we felt lonely, or bored, and we started using to help us, to get out of those kinds of moods. But yes, when we take it immediately, artificially, we come out of the mood. We are, the same person who was, sad and depressed and morose and all of that. In a few minutes after a few drinks, they are laughing and talking and, like nothing has happened. But whatever goes up must come down. That's the law of nature, law of gravity. So that if you take something to make you artificially happy, when it starts to wear off, you are going to come down. You are going to become depressed. You are going to become anxious. You're going to become irritable. In fact, you are going to go lower than where you were before. And that is the vortex you get yourself in. It's a spiral, a downward spiral where you become depressed, you become emotionally overwhelmed by a real life situation, some decision or some situation that you're faced with, and you go and take a drink or you take a smoke. When you wear off, now you realize you still have to pay the mortgage, you still don't have the installment, you still have to deal with the rejection, and now you are more depressed, and that is what perpetuates the addiction, the dependence. So that now, and in our society, we have been using some very inappropriate ways. I hate to say this because I worked in the field of psychiatry. I worked at St. Anne's Hospital, Ward 8 in Port of Spain, General Hospital. I worked at Cora Hospital, Substance Abuse Unit. I worked at this Ward 1 psychiatric unit. So I have seen this firsthand. I've worked with, I have studied, I was a psychiatric social worker for quite a long time. So that I know in the allopathic field, a lot of people go to their general practitioners. And as I say this, general practitioners, they should not really be prescribing psychotropic drugs. Psychotropic drugs, that is mood altering substances, sleeping pills, tranquilizers, and so on, really should be administered by a psychiatrist who has specialized in that field. But what we have happening in Trinidad, a lot of people go to their GP because they have a relationship with them. And sometimes they have to get a medical to cover them for the few days they were absent or they're drinking. And so they get one of the major withdrawal symptoms of alcoholism is insomnia. So you go to the doctor and you know, even when I am doing an evaluation here, three of the questions I'm going to ask most of my patients who come to me with emotional issues is I will ask them how they're sleeping. Because sleep is a very powerful indicator as to if there's underlying psychological or emotional distress. Person who is facing psychological stressors generally may have problems sleeping. They could drop asleep, but when you wake up, you can't go back to sleep. So the doctors ask these questions, how is your sleep? How is your appetite? How is your bodily elimination? And once you say, well, doc, I'm not sleeping, because a lot of people become dependent on alcohol to help them to sleep. Even normal people who are not alcoholics, they take that evening nightcap, they call it. They wine at dinner and all of that, because alcohol is a sedative and it will make you feel sleepy. So when you're not drinking and your body has become dependent on the alcohol, then you suffer, and insomnia is one of the principal withdrawal symptoms. You tell the doctor, well, you're having trouble to sleep, and he's going to give you some sedative. And these little innocent looking tablets can become habit forming very, very quickly. Because once you keep using them, now they will, when you stop, you can't, it's like you're on a merry-go-round that is going faster and faster. Now you can't even jump off, you know. So that, and this is the beginnings of dependency. And let me add to that. A lot of people start off with the 5 milligram sleeping pills. But in a little while, the body will develop tolerance, and 5 milligrams will not work. And you have it there, so you'll probably take another five. And I have had patients here who I wouldn't like to say the amount. And I know one of them is listening to this program. He could probably tell you. He used to have people, running to the various drugstores to buy sedatives, sleeping pills for him. It can get as bad as that. And some people, also a lot of patients, actually, young people going to UV and so on, who were put on sleeping pills, found that they had developed tolerance for it. Now going on to use alcohol in conjunction because they have a private bar in the house, or they have access to alcohol on campus and elsewhere. And now they are also using in conjunction with their sleeping pills or their psychiatric medication, they're using alcohol. And I want to say, I've said this before on this program, that is a very dangerous, even deadly practice, because the people who manufactured these medications, these sleeping pills, did not uh, do their trials with people who were drinking alcohol. So that it is very easy for a person who is on sedatives, prescription pills, to overdose themselves with alcohol and not only put their brain to sleep, but it can put their heart to sleep. If your heart drop asleep, you're dead. So that again, emotionally overwhelmed and not learning proper coping skills is one of the principal triggers of a relapse. And a person in recovery need to understand what were their emotional triggers. You know, then there, as I said, it could be depression, it could be loneliness. Because when a person stops drinking, they lose all their friends because you are advised to stay away from slippery people, slippery places, and situations. So that an alcoholic who is chronic alcoholic or drug addict, all their friends are usually people who smoking and drinking. That is their social circle. And now, if they have to stop associating with those people, loneliness is a result. And this is why it is critical for these people, if they want to stay sober and in recovery, they need to find other people who are supportive and who are informed and educated about staying in recovery. And you find these people in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. And that is one of the great benefits of joining a support group like AA or NA when you come out of treatment facilities, rehab facilities, or if you intend to stop and stay stopped, it would be tremendously useful for you to join a support group. And as I say this, we have support groups now online. And I do recognize a lot of young women, women generally, who never wanted to go to an AA meeting in the old days because you would have had to go and sit with a whole lot group of men and all of that. They are now joining the online AA groups because they can stay in the comfort of their home. They can still be there to take care of the children, even while in the meeting. You can turn the video off and you can be taking care of your children, doing your chores and all of that, and still listening to the meeting. So this has been a gift, I would say. That's one of the gifts coming out of COVID, that we have Zoom meetings now where people can be able to accept, not only women, men and women, young men can access a meeting online without feeling self-conscious or having to bother too much about the stigma. Then there are other, some people are bored because when you stop drinking, you have a lot of time. You have nothing to do and plenty of time in which to do it. And that kind of boredom itself could lead you to, because that would have been one of the reasons a lot of people drank in the old days. In my case, if rain was falling, that was enough reason. Place was cold. If the sun was hot, I would use that as a reason. If we won the match, that was sufficient reason. If we lose the match, if a friend was getting married, that was reason to drink. Or if some friend died at the wake. So all of these are triggers. And these were some of my triggers, You understand? So that one has to be able to understand these, what are my triggers, because they are unique and peculiar to each individual. Then for a lot of people, there are social triggers like peer pressure. Now that you want to stop drinking, you got up this morning, you vomited and all of that, you got sick, you got yourself into trouble, you spent money you shouldn't, you ended up in a place, or even the police stop you and charge you for drunken driving and you just got bail and come out. But out of loneliness, you be wanting to belong to that same group of friends that you belong to, that you grew up with, you went to school with. You can't seem to separate from them, but they all drinking. And for you to retain membership of that group, you have to either drink, or I've seen people not drinking, staying sober, but still liming with those fellas and buying alcohol for them. You know, and to my mind, that is like, you just keep paying your subscription to the group until you relapse. You would still have your drinking friends with you. And that is almost a sure way to end up in relapse again. If you are hanging out with people who are still drinking and smoking, or you are liming in the bar and all of that, one day when you're disturbed, something has happened and you go, you will know when your hand just reach for a glass, and oh, that's all you have to do. Take that first drink and all hell will break loose. Then there are some of us even who might have been sober for years, but this is especially so in the first year or 2 years of your drinking, where you still get invited to weddings and functions at relative parties and all of that, where your friends and siblings and relatives are drinking. And the truth is, all of these people would probably compliment you and encourage you. Boy, you did the best thing that you stopped drinking. But they'll do that when they are sober. But the same people, after they take a few drinks, will seem to forget, because they also believe that you're not having a good time unless you're drinking. And there's a saying, misery likes company. And they are going to encourage you to take a drink. The same people who are complimenting you for staying sober will tell you, well, look, if you take one, that will not do anything. And they honestly believe that. They don't know. And that is the reason for this program, is to educate, the population on some of these triggers that could perpetuate your drinking, even if you're secretly trying to stop, or can cause you to relapse if you have stopped and trying to stay in recovery. And then there are some people who are in relationships where the other partner is drinking. It's very, very difficult. I know a relative of mine who is many years sober. This young man, who I respect a lot, but he's living with a spouse who's still drinking. And I am grateful that although my wife is not an alcoholic, but she don't drink. And it's really, it is very, very unpleasant to say, but sometimes even my own family, sometimes when she goes to some gathering and they're drinking, they would and try to encourage her to drink, take a drink, we won't tell him anything. And she said, no, 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 not that you wouldn't tell him anything, I don't want to. You understand? I have to compliment her for that. And she's my lookout, my taster, because I remember on a trip in Europe, they they served us Black Forest cake, and she tasted it and she said, no, 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 you don't have this because this has alcohol in it. So it is very, those of you who are spouses who have a husband or a wife in recovery, if you're not alcoholic, it would do well. You would do a great service to that your partner if you consider not engaging in alcohol yourself. Although, it might sound selfish that not because you can't drink, I shouldn't take a drink. But I can tell you, if you are not drinking or smoking, It is very, very difficult to live with someone in the same house, in the same space, because your house is your sanctuary. You can't leave your house and run. And if they are bringing alcohol, keeping it in the house, and drinking it in the house, it makes it not impossible for you to stay sober, but ever so much more difficult. So that, you know, I in a previous program spoke about, those people who getting married to people who are alcoholics, and actually throwing themselves into a hell, a lifelong hell of misery because of that relationship. So one, should be aware. And then there are environmental triggers, like carnival is one of them, going to places, bars and clubs and even particular friends, houses could be a trigger. Because the mind, we have a memory and we remember things, occasions in the past. And I even hear people when they're talking about their drinking experience, even in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've heard it from meetings I've attended there, where some people actually glamorize, when they were drinking and how they were beautiful times, and they did enjoy themselves. And sometimes there's a yearning to go back to that. I wish I could go back to that. In fact, my own relatives, they say, Uncle, we like you better when you were drinking because yeah, I was much more fun to be around. Now they become very self-conscious if I'm around and they're drinking because they know I do this program on alcoholism and drug addiction. And uh, my thinking on it. And not that I have anything against people who could take a drink and enjoy it, as I keep saying. So I don't mind being not being invited. And then there are certain sensory perceptions, like a smell that can bring on the craving for the drug. There's even music that can, you know, there. I remember friends of mine who were not able. They would confess that they were able to better appreciate music when they smoked. You know, when I smoke, I could pull out the violin from the band and listen to the violin alone. These are some of the weird hallucinatory effects of some drugs, some mind altering substances. So that even smell and taste and sight and hearing, these senses could bring on the urge to use the drug. So we have to be mindful. These could be our own particular triggers. And then there are some of us who have psychological triggers, from unresolved trauma that, whenever we think about that, a separation or reason, or some bad incident that happened with us and so on, we become depressed and our mind goes to take a drink to self-medicate. And then there are those of us who are given to impulsive behavior sometimes, where we don't really think about it and it just triggers. So for those who have impulsive behaviors that could lead them to take a drink, they need to stay away from it, distance themselves from where it is available. And of course, on previous programs, I've spoken about the genetic factors that you might have inherited the genes from your ancestors, and that could predispose you to drinking. And of course, if by drinking, sometimes we develop physical triggers where we have to take a drink to steady the hands or to steady the feet or you know, to sleep. And then some of us have what you call habitual triggers, where using drugs becomes part of the routine. And then there are those of us who believe when we do a good piece of work, we have to celebrate with a drink. So these will be unique and peculiar to everyone, anyone in recovery, or even anyone considering stopping or using drugs. You need to spend a little time and look at what were my triggers, what were the things, why did I use drugs? My triggers will really give me the answer to why did I use drugs. And once I know those triggers, I would be able now to avoid them. So I know when we having conversations like this, the time seems to fly. But of course, if anyone has any questions, you can post them in my YouTube column. You can access my YouTube, uh, all the programs by typing in my name, Ram Naresh Dwarika in YouTube, Addiction and Recovery, and all the programs are there. You can do the same thing by going to my profile on Facebook as well, where these programs have been, and they're programs covering many aspects of alcoholism and drug addiction. So I want to thank all of you for listening this morning. I want to thank Radio and TV Jagriti, the operators there, for facilitating the program, and the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha for giving this free airtime as a public service to our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you again, and see you all next week.